Glad you can join me again. I'm Tim Mendees, and I'm doing another one of my live readings. This time, I will be doing my story, How Much is the Doggy in the Window, from the Emerald Bay Books anthology Unleashed Scary Stories of Furry Friends. I will tell you all about the anthology and other stuff that Emerald Bay are doing afterwards. I'll also be doing my usual Q&A, so if you have any questions, stick them down in the comment section, preferably before I finish. So, so when I finish, I'm not sat there like a lemon. Uh, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack straight on with how much is that doggy in the window? Mr. Davies' kind old face crinkled in puzzlement to the extent that he looked like a mass of flesh-coloured crepe paper. Are you sure you want this one? The creature he pointed towards fixed its deep black eyes on the pet shop owner. Mr. Davies shuddered. The strangely twisted dog had been in the shop for months. Everybody who'd clapped their eyes on its patchy, matted fur and strange, scaly ears were instantly filled with revulsion. Everyone except Charlotte Jenkins, that is. It was supposed to be a Pharaohhound cross, but just what it was crossed with was a matter of some local debate. The strange fellow Mr. Davy had acquired it from said it came from somewhere called Leng. It was part of a small litter, but all the other pups looked like pharaoh hounds. Alas, they all died, leaving only the strange and sinister runt, almost like a cuckoo in the nest. Tom Jenkins looked at his daughter. Her face had lit up when she saw the creature. First, Tom had thought it was pity that he saw in her wide blue eyes. Now he understood it as love. Her pupils had dilated in the same way that her mother's used to when he'd done something vaguely romantic. Yes, Tom smiled. I think we do. Charlotte smiled at her father and continued tickling the unusual creature behind its strangely hooked ears. The bond between a child and a pet is one that binds tightly. When her last pet, a cat named Harry, was hit by a car, Charlotte was understandably distraught. With the tragic loss of her mother just over a year ago to cancer still fresh in her young mind, another loss was almost too much to bear. What was her father to do? He too was still suffering, and seeing his daughter go through the pain of bereavement all over again was simply too painful. But a dead pet can be replaced, unlike a parent. They had set out with the intention of getting a rabbit or a gerbil, something that spends most of its life in a cage or hutch, away from speeding vehicles. But they somehow ended up with Patch. Patch. What an appropriate name. The creature's bristly black fur only grew in thick streaks down its flanks and isolated tufts here and there. The rest of its skin was scaly and cold to the touch. Tom instantly disliked the animal, but his daughter loved it, so he would, at least attempt, to love it too. This wasn't easy. It appeared that when it came to Tom and Patch, the dislike was mutual. Charlotte doted on her new pet and insisted on taking it everywhere. The pair elicited funny looks from neighbours as they walked through the quiet suburbia of Bettles Cove. The sweet little blonde girl and the rapidly growing monstrous hound. People would rather cross the street than walk past the creature. Something about its prominent fangs and shark-like eyes terrified the local populace. Charlotte was quickly becoming a pariah. After the summer holidays ended and Patch was left to his own devices for most of the day, the trouble really began. Patch's seemingly unstoppable growth was matched only by his increasingly toxic odour. It had gotten so bad that Tom had to ban the beast from the house. He had crafted a large kennel out of scrap wood that he stored in his modest but well-stocked shed and confined Patch to the garden. Children can be cruel, and Charlotte, in her increasingly withdrawn state, was becoming an easy target. Her whole demeanour had shifted from being a bright, outgoing girl to one that was sullen and brooding. She had started to take an interest in the darker things in life and had an almost morbid obsession with the graveyard. At lunch times, she would sneakily fetch Patch from home and sit with him amongst the headstones. It was after one particularly horrible day when the first troubling incident occurred. Charlotte had returned home in a foul mood after being picked on and had sat simmering by the patio window. All of a sudden, she was disturbed by raised voices coming from the garden. Charlotte peered from behind the curtain and found the source of the din. Mr. Stanley from next door had one hand waving a finger in Tom's face and the bloody remains of his Yorkshire Terrier, Kimberly, in the other. It didn't take a genius to work out what had happened. Kimberly was always a very highly strung animal that yapped and snarled incessantly. That very morning, she had gone for Charlotte as she walked down the path. Mr. Stanley pulled her back on her retractable lead and apologized profusely. This didn't stop Charlotte wishing some terrible fate to befall the irritating animal. When she saw Patch licking his chops and the small, gnawed bones outside his kennel, Charlotte smiled. Being 15 can be a nightmare for any girl, but especially if that girl is considered an outcast. Charlotte showed no interest in the things that most girls fill their time with. In fact, she had very little interest in anything save Patch and the dusty old books she had started to peruse at the library. Her obsession with pseudo-occult texts and old anthropological studies came after a strange visit to the vet. They had owned Patch for nearly 2 years by this point, and the strange canine had started to change. His hind legs had grown muscular and wide, while the front legs had remained a relatively normal size, despite the flat, wide paws. This change gave Pat a rat-like posture that was deeply unsettling. But it was the twin growths on his shoulders that prompted veterinary advice. Tom feared it was cancer. The vet scratched his head as he looked at the x-rays of the unique specimen. The lumps seemed to be bone growths that joined the skeleton at the shoulders and tapered down the furry patches on his back. Jane Matthews had never seen anything remotely similar to Patch in her 20 years in practice. She quizzed Tom about where he got the creature. Tom explained at length Mr. Davies' story of the strange litter from Leng. Charlotte had sat in sullen silence, but suddenly brightened when Jane mentioned the word mythological in conjunction with Leng. Tom was just as confused as Jane. He had no real knowledge of world myths and legends. His job as a motor mechanic had no call for it. He was speechless when, after letting Jane take some blood and swabs from Patch, Charlotte volunteered to do some research on the fabled plateau. Charlotte had conscripted the local librarian, Gertrude Green, as her assistant in this matter. The aged librarian was always one for a good bit of mystery, and her considerable skills had pointed Charlotte towards several rare volumes in the restricted section. What Charlotte discovered was of enormous interest. It was so interesting that she never uttered a single word of it to Tom. From that day forward, Patch never left Charlotte's side. Tom tried to put his foot down when it came to him being allowed in the house, but Patch always snarled at him, changing his mind. Even more disturbing than the threat itself was Charlotte's amused, almost gleeful response to her pet's actions. The relationship between father and daughter quickly started to unravel. Charlotte barely spoke to her father anymore. She devoted all of her time to an unusual pet. She would confide to Patch all her woes, a fact that made Tom acutely jealous. He couldn't seem to bond with Charlotte the same way she did with Patch. It seemed to Tom that they had some kind of connection, a link. Tom thought on more than one occasion that Patch held Charlotte in some kind of thrall. He quickly put this out of his mind as the ravings of an overprotective parent. Unbeknown to Tom, Charlotte had started to skip school altogether and spend her day with Patch out in the woods and the graveyard. It was at this point that the local police started to become aware of certain thefts from the cemetery. 3 years after Tom had purchased Patch from Mr. Davy, things were starting to come to a head. It wouldn't be long before terrible things started to happen in Bettles Cove. Tom peered through the grimy window of his oil-encrusted garage. The sky was dark and brooding over the Cornish hills. As he watched the fine drizzle play in the light of the petrol pump, a familiar vehicle pulled in and parked. This was the reason Tom had gone in early that day. That and the fact that it was the 4th anniversary of his wife's tragic demise. Tom hoped that work would take his mind off things. The driver squeezed out of the car that was far too small for a man of his bulk. He smoothed his walrus moustache, glowered at the sky, and pulled his tatty suit jacket around him. Ding! The bell sounded as the big man clattered through the door. Morning, Detective Sergeant. Right on time as always, Tom called out as cheerfully as he could, while stifling a yawn. D.S. Finch shook Tom's hand and helped himself to the pot of coffee on the desk. Rotten weather, he grumbled. Yeah, Tom peered at the sky. Looks like what little of summer we were due this year is officially over. You're lucky, Finch shrugged. At least you're indoors and don't have to freeze your nuts off in a sodden graveyard all blasted morning. What's going on? Tom inquired. There's been another theft of the graveyard. What kind of theft? Tom had heard rumours, but one offers his tall tales in small, isolated communities. Finch leaned in conspiratorially. Now, I only tell you this because I know your Charlotte hangs around there and might have seen something. I'm trying to keep this hush-hush, as the damn press will have a field day. So this is in strictest confidence, Finch grinned. So if they turn up after I tell you, I'll have your balls for breakfast. He chuckled. Tom knew that Finch was probably joking, though his disdain for the press was legendary. In any case, he wasn't going to risk finding out. My lips are sealed. Tom did a zipping motion across his lips. Good. Well, for the last couple of months, we've had a spate of exhumed corpses. Whoever had been doing this has been removing certain parts. Jesus, Tom gasped. Indeed. Thing is, the ones dug up haven't been the old ones towards the end of the cemetery. It seems like our friendly local resurrectionist likes them fresh. Old Mrs. Adams was dug up last night. Bloody hell, Tom was aghast. Who would do such a thing? That's what I intend to find out. It looks like Bettles Cove has got his very old Ed Gein. Damn. There are some real monsters out there. Finch shrugged. If only it were that simple. Sickos come in all shapes and sizes. It's usually the least likely suspect that has a fridge full of body parts. He finished his coffee. I'll be back in later to collect my car. I'd better be going, or uniform will have trampled all the evidence into the mud. Tom watched D.S. Finch stride off into the distance. A deep sense of foreboding had started to set in. Something had struck a terrible chord during the conversation. As he set to work on the MOT of Finch's car, his own words echoed around his head. There are some real monsters out there. After school that afternoon, Charlotte peered down from her perch on the hill. She was hiding in the doorway of an old family mausoleum, watching the police activity in the newer section of the graveyard. None of them had seen her, clad as she was in a dark hoodie and enveloped by shadow. Her eyes showed no emotion as she watched the fingertip search being carried out. The fact that they had no idea as to what was going on made a wry smile play on her lips. In the book she had been studying, she had found a reference to a corpse-eating cult, and they're linked to some kind of monstrous hound. Patch had suddenly gone off his pedigree chum, and she figured that he might prefer something a little more special. She was right. Patch thrived after his first taste of human flesh. He grew stronger, and the changes in his physiognomy more pronounced. The only problem was, he wanted more and more. Charlotte didn't see the harm of it. After all, they were already dead, so they didn't care. She looked upon it as a kind of recycling, though it was clear that the police didn't agree. When she was sure that she hadn't left any evidence at the scene of Patch's latest dig, which she could tell by the annoyed look on D.S. Finch's face, she turned to walk away. Look, it's the freak! Charlotte cursed. It was Angela Jackson and her cronies. The four girls that were responsible for making the last 2 years of her school life an absolute misery. What you doing here, freak? Angela spat. Creepy Charlotte's only friends are the dead, Emma Bates chuckled. Them and that creepy dog of hers, her sister Sarah added. Charlotte tried to push through the group and slink away, but Angela got right up in her face. Nah, she sneered. She's here to talk to her dead mummy. That was it, the final straw. Charlotte's right fist balled tightly as the red mist descended. Before the thought had even registered, she had pummeled Angela right on the bridge of her nose. Blood gushed from her nostrils in 2 thick torrents that splashed down the front of her white blouse. Charlotte took off over the graves. Get her! Angela screamed at Natalie, the final member of her clique, who took off with the Bates sisters after the fleeing Charlotte. Charlotte was in much better shape than her pursuers, but that mattered little. One wrong footing, and she would be sent sprawling onto her face over a gravestone. Her heart pounded, and her lungs burned as she fled for her life. She could hear the girls baying like wolves as she ran for the fence. The kicking of a lifetime awaited her as she got caught. Finally, she cleared the graveyard and reached the lichen-encrusted graveyard wall. Hardly slowing her pace, she nimbly threw herself over and raced across the church field towards the woods beyond. Though it was only late afternoon, the woods were dark and gloomy. Charlotte intended to make her way around towards the River Camel. She could rejoin the road there, and it was only a stone's throw to her home. All she could think about was how much she needed Patch. If Patch had have been there, then none of this would have happened. If she had skipped school at lunch and fetched a dog, like she often did, she would be safe. The only reason she didn't was the major police presence in the graveyard. She thought that even they might put 2 and 2 together if Patch started slevering hungrily. Her mind had been wandering as she picked her way through the ancient twisted trunks and thick patches of scratchy bracken. So much so that when she was tackled from the side by the large body of Emma, it came as a complete surprise. Got you, you creepy bitch, she bellowed as Charlotte hit the mud. Hit her, Sarah demanded. Emma obliged. Charlotte's head was slammed brutally into the ground as Natalie and Angela arrived. Leave her, Angela snarled. The bitch is mine. Emma hoisted her up, and her sister joined her in pinioning her arms. Angela stormed forwards and punched her in the mouth. Charlotte's lips split and the metallic tang of blood welled in her mouth. Tasted nice. Charlotte smiled. "Oh, you like it, do you, you crazy whore?" Angela screamed in rage. She reached into her school blazer and pulled out a small lock knife. "Let's see you like this, then." She grinned as she opened the blade and waved it in Charlotte's face. Natalie had become shaken by the violent turn things were taking. A beating was fine, but she didn't like blades. "Come on, Angie, she isn't worth it." She tried to reason with her friend. Angela fixed her with a hateful stare. "Get your bony ass over here and hold her legs. I don't want her kicking me." Natalie stood statue still and looked at Angela pleadingly. "Don't do anything stupid, Angie. We'll get in trouble." "Who cares? She broke my fucking nose, so I'm going to cut her with or without your help." Natalie held up her hands. "I'm having nothing to do with this. This is bullshit." She yelled and ran into the trees. "Damn it!" Angela wasn't impressed. In her brutal world view, this was tantamount to betrayal. "Hold her tight. We'll deal with Nat later." The Bates sister did as instructed. Angela moved in and nicked the top two buttons off Charlotte's blouse. "You scared, freak?" She grinned, with blood from her nose between her crooked teeth. Charlotte said nothing. She'd said nothing since she'd been punched. Her eyes were locked on Angela, and the twisted grin remained on her lips. It was like she was in some kind of trance. A piercing scream from just over the way caused Angela to jump and spin round. "What the fuck was that?" she asked with a note of panic in her voice. Charlotte's grin widened. "Good dog," she said. Angela spun around again and prepared to slash Charlotte's face. Before the blade met flesh, a strange beating sound stayed her hand. It sounded like a pair of huge leathery wings. She looked up in alarm, just in time to see Patch's colossal fangs crunch into her skull. Sarah was the first to scream and let go of Charlotte. Patch released his prey as she darted into the trees. He sprung on his powerful hind legs and was on her in a flash. She never got another chance to scream. Emma turned to flee, but Charlotte caught her legs with her foot and sent her twisting to the floor. Charlotte put her knee in the center of her back and kept her pinned down as Patch ripped the choicest cuts of meat from her sister. Patch growled with happiness when he saw that the feast wasn't over. He walked over softly and bowed his head so Charlotte could tickle his ears. Emma babbled hysterically as the beast stretched his jaws wide. Charlotte pulled her head sharply back with a handful of messy brown hair and whispered in her ear, "Play dead, bitch." Tom knew something was wrong. Parents have a sixth sense when it comes to their offspring, and he knew it instinctively that Charlotte was in trouble. As he locked the garage for the night and headed to the car, he could hear sirens in the distance. D.S. Finch hadn't returned for his car, and he just knew that Charlotte was in some way connected to the disturbance. It was almost 7 by the time he had forced his way through the traffic and reached the river bridge before the turning towards his home. The place was crawling with police. They were stopping each car to ask for witnesses. D.S. Finch informed him that someone was walking their dog and had stumbled across a horrific scene. It appeared that 2 or more girls from the local school had been butchered. Tom's heart stopped upon hearing the news, but Finch assured him that Charlotte was fine and warned him to keep the doors locked and his daughter indoors until they apprehend whoever or whatever did the grisly deed. Tom's mind raced as he pulled up the drive. Finch had said words such as bestial, mauled, and savaged. He knew instantly that Patch was involved. He locked the car, and after collecting his axe from the shed, entered via the back door. The kitchen was in darkness, and a foul smell assaulted his sinus almost instantly. He recognized it as the terrible corpse odor of his daughter's demonic pet. He didn't switch the light on. If he was going to slay the monster, he would have to rely on stealth. Weak light from the outside bulb cast a thin shard of pale light across the black and white checkered floor. Tom almost fainted when he spotted the thick red smear that stretched from the back door to the living room. Tom gagged as he entered the living room. Patch was there. He was sitting with his back to the door, and Patch was eating something. Tom tried to get a look at what he was eating, then quickly wished he hadn't. The evil hound was chewing on a human arm. Tom feared the worst. He was convinced that it was his Charlotte that the creature was feeding upon. With tears in his eyes, he raised the axe above his head and prepared to strike. "No, Dad, don't!" He crashed to the wall in alarm. Patch snapped his head around and howled in fury. Charlotte stood on the staircase. She still had that weird look on her face. Oh no. Hang on. I think that's crashed. Having trouble? Can somebody tell me, is that crashed? I don't know what to do here. I don't know whether to carry on or... Oh, you can still see, right, you can still see me. It's my feedback's gone. Okay, right. Very sorry about that. It's just all gone down here. I don't know what's going on. Okay, so we'll start from the bit when Tom feared the worst. He was convinced that it was his Charlotte that creature was feeding upon. With tears in his eyes, he raised the axe above his head and prepared to strike. "No, Dad, don't!" He crashed into the wall in alarm. Patch snapped his head around and howled in fury. Charlotte stood on the staircase and she still had that weird look on her face. "Sweetie, keep away from Patch. He's hurt people," Tom stammered. Charlotte didn't say a word, just fixed him with the same dead-eyed stare as Patch. "I'm sorry, sweetie, but Patch needs to be put down." He raised the axe once more. "No!" Charlotte cried. "I will not let you hurt Patch. He is my only friend." Tom was welling up again. He turned to plead with his daughter to understand, to tell her that he was there for her, that she didn't need her monstrous pet. But the bonds between a child and a pet can be unbreakable. Sometimes not even a doting parent could come between them. Patch stood upright on his hind legs. His massive forepaws swiped the axe from his hands. Tom tried to back away as the furred stripes on Patch's shoulders unfurled into huge wings. Tom's heart broke as he heard the last words he will ever hear. "Patch, kill." The end. Thank you. Yeah, sorry about that. It's the you got a playback thing here. It's just completely gone down. Anyway, yes, that was my story. How much is the doggy in the window? From the anthology Unleashed. Scary Stories of Furry Friends. Try saying that several times fast. From Emerald Bay Books. It's out now on paperback and Kindle. You can pick it up from Amazon. If you want to grab hold of a copy, use the universal link getbook.at/unleashedanthology. It's listed below the video in the details. Okay, I'm going to take some questions in a moment, but before I do, let me just tell you how that story came about. Again, it's one of the ones that I found. I saw the listing for it It's all about horror, like pets, basically. And anybody who knows me knows if I could get on with humans half as well as I get on with animals, I wouldn't have half the troubles I've had in my life. Yeah, I'm an animal lover. I love them. But the problem was I couldn't really think of anything. Uh, and then and then because I was thinking about pets, the first thing that came in my head was that old rhyme, you know. How much is that doggy in the window? The one with the. But in my version, it wasn't going to have a waggly tail. It was going to be the one with the scabrous wings. I was thinking Lovecraft, the hound, a pet. So that's basically how that one came about. And it's one of those stories that I literally had the idea one day and it was written a day after. It kind of wrote itself. It just like, okay. I'm elated that it got chosen because I'm actually quite proud of that one. Yeah. Before I move on to do anything else, like I say, get some questions in. If you want to ask me anything, put it down in the question bit in the thing. Let me just tell you a little bit about. Oh, before I move on from that, this copy came from Amazon like yesterday, so I haven't got round to reading it properly. But I have read one story in it, and I urge people to check it out. It's by Natalie Brown, uh, and it's called The Cat Lady's Dinner. It's got a really cool. I don't want to ruin anything, but it's got a. If I was to say it had a really cool Ulfar feel to it. People who need to who people will get it. But anyway, I recommend it. It's a really good story. Okay, so also out this month, a few days ago, these two beauties by Emerald Bay Books, Horror for Hire. This is all work-based horror. So horror in the office, horror in the blah 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 blah. You know, just horror at work. Um, I would hold off ordering them for a day or so paperback wise because there's a slight formatting issue with the Amazon printing thing, but that should be rectified very shortly. But I urge you to pick these up. The second shift has my story, God in the Machine, in it, which is a pseudo sequel to a story that was also released this month in a different anthology for a different publisher called The Parasite Code. I mean, my story is not the publisher. Well, that'd be a great name for a publishing house, wouldn't it? But I urge you to pick this one up as well. First Shift contains probably the most bonkers story I've ever written. So as you can imagine, that comes up with some quite stiff competition. Both of them are available on Amazon. Again, it starts getbook.at, then it's Horror for Hire 1 and Horror for Hire 2. Nice and easy to remember. Right, so let's see what we've got here. Rob Petrie, one of my mates. Good to see you, Rob. Thanks for tuning in, mate. Hello, Chris. There's another one. Only a little late. It's fine. It loops all night, Raven. Don't worry. Go, girl. Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, you mean the punch? That's Joel. Hello, Joel. He says, go, girl. I'm assuming he's talking about the punch in the nose. Yeah. Yeah, you can all see me. Yeah, it's all good. No, you see, it just all went down this side. It just went completely black. It's just really confusing because it said it's still saying it now. Normally I can see what you can see, so that's why I'm kind of going blind at showing you things. But all it says here is sorry, we're having trouble with playing this video. Who knows? Okay. Yeah, I know. Damn, bad patch down. That's really funny you should say that, Raven, because you're not the only person who has actually said that. Raven comments, although I think I'm not supposed to want a patch of my own. Yeah, I've had a similar problem with some other of my stories featuring other sort of furry menaces, also from the Lovecraftian canon, that certain furtive zoogs. and certain people in my my acquaintance, i.e. my partner, really wants a pet Zoog. Okay, question. What is the weirdest most exotic pet I've ever had? That's a good question. Um, I used to breed Mackley spectre stick insects, you know, the big Australian devils. The females are sort of that size, and they're really spiky, like brambles, and their abdomens coil like scorpions, and that's one of their defensives. But the males are shorter. They look like logs, and they got these wings on the back. And they're beautiful creatures. I used to breed them for a local pet shop. Um, I've had a pet tarantula. I've had I keep shrimp. Keep ornamental cherry shrimp. Um, yeah, I've had quite a lot. The thing is, I grew up with animals. I mean, I've always been in an animal-y household. I mean, my mother always had parrots and bred them. My grandfather used to breed chinchillas, and being the true northerner, ferrets. See, I've always grown up in a house full of creatures, you know, and from a very early age, I was breeding Russian dwarf hamsters for a pet shop, which anyone will tell you isn't difficult at all. You put two of them in the same cage, and all of a sudden you got 50 of the little things. Awesome little creatures. Okay. Question. Do you find any recurring themes across your stories? Several of your stories seem to involve seemingly innocuous creatures that become more and more threatening. Oh, and it was about the punch. Yeah. That's Joel. Yeah, I do. I don't know. I like that kind of feel of you get something that kind of it's how to explain it. It's also a thing you can see something that's quite weak looking or innocent looking, but everything has a dark side and everything can turn on you. I mean, anybody who owns a cute little hamster can tell you that if that little creature sticks its fingers in your finger, its fingers in your finger, it sinks its fangs in your finger, it's going to hurt. Recurring themes. I like to put. I mean, one of my big things growing up, I was raised on a diet of Hammer Horror, Monty Python, and Carry On movies. So I like to put horror in the everyday. You know, I think for me, I also growing up, big fan of the John Pertwee era of Doctor Who, which a lot of that was. It's like there was like killer plastic daffodils and little killer dolls and things like that. Mannequins, the shop mannequins. I mean, I think if you can tap into something that's there that you can see every day on the way to work or the shop or something, that's terrifying. But yeah, so I get yeah, and like I've said before, everything I've kind of created my own little world that if not most of them take place in. Some of them are connected to. There's very few stories I've written that don't have some connection to Bell's Cove and Hyde Bend and Hollow Hills. It's a little section. If you look at Cornwall on the map, there's a little bit on the coast just before you get up to Falmouth. There's nothing there. It's just this bleak sort of expanse, and it's like yeah, prime. Because I mean, like what happened to with Ramsey Campbell about August Derleth said, write your Lovecraftian stuff in your backyard because then you know what you're talking about. Whereas, you know, I can't really write about Massachusetts in any kind of authenticity because I've never been there. So, but where I have been a lot as a kid was Cornwall. And Cornwall, when you're a kid, because it's so windswept and the sea is brutal. Some of the storms and things you get down there, it's brutal. It's quite wild country. It's like the Highlands of Scotland as well, which I spent a lot of time in. Yeah, it's that sort of the everyday but unsettling, and I think that's how I like to. I don't sit down and actually, you know, think, oh, I'm going to write something about something every day. It just kind of happens that way. Was there ever an outline thought where Patch was going to get put down, or was it always a foregone conclusion that he'd be chowing down on her father? Chris, um, it was always a foregone conclusion. Always a foregone conclusion. And one of them people, somebody actually posted on, oh, yeah, it was Erie River Publishing. They did an interview with me. They sent me a questionnaire. I filled it out for them for their patron site thing. And one of the questions on it was, "Are you the type of person who would kill the cat or let the cat live? Kill the pet, let the pet live?" And my response was, the bigger question is the pet in my story going to let you live? Like I say, I prefer, I love animals, and yeah, if I'm going to give the edge, if it comes to a toss up, who's going to live and who's going to die, and it's an animal and a person, sorry, mate, Tiddles is going with me. I just think horror's more fun that way. Especially, it's the age old cheering the underdog, isn't it? Literally, you know. Yeah. So yeah, it was always a foregone conclusion. That's some good questions tonight, fellas, people. Just checking now that I've covered everything. Yeah, if nobody else wants to say anything, this is sort of the last call. Um, just before I go, I'll tell you, I probably will be doing another one, and it probably will be happening in 2 weeks' time. I've not decided what it's going to be yet, because I was planning on doing something, but it doesn't seem to be the right time to do that for one reason or another. Um, so if any publishers are out there who have any of my work and you want me to do one for your thing, I do have a slot in 2 weeks' time. If not, I will probably figure something out. As always, thank you for joining me. Yeah, I'm glad you all enjoyed my story. Again, remember, this story came from the Emerald Bay Books anthology, Unleashed, Scary Stories of Furry Friends. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.